Hello, and welcome to the Race, Wealth, and Health Podcast, a podcast that serves to educate and empower while we explore the intersections of social justice, economic empowerment, and holistic well-being within communities of color. I am your host, Dr. Joycelyn Morris, and I invite you to join me as we dive deep into the crucial topics that shape our lives, challenge the status quo, and strive for a more equitable future for all. Welcome back to part 2 of our series on mindfulness with Shannon Reinard Demko. Last week, we explored and defined mindfulness while emphasizing its accessibility for all. In this week's episode, Shannon will take us further to provide practical ways in which we can integrate mindfulness into our daily practices. Let's listen in.
Yep. And one thing I was going to ask you mentioned that mindfulness can also be a form of self-care. And we know that there's definitely a large push campaign, if you will, around self-care. And then there's a bit of chatter about what self-care should be, and that it's not just a consumerist approach, right? Not buying things, but it's also the day-to-day practices. And you also mentioned that people of color in this country have a sordid history, if you will, and so we carry a lot of those traumas from the past and even in the present ways that they show up within us. That being said, what would you say, or maybe have you said, to the person of color who's like, I don't have time? Like self-care and the idea of self-care is a luxury, a time that I don't have. I'm too busy attempting to just survive, to get by, to provide for my family. You know, and obviously there's those who can, but because Black people specifically have to work twice as hard on the job, like there's so much pressure in how we show up in this world. And so what do you say to that person who's like, I don't have the luxury of the time to do that?
I say, I understand. I hear you, and I hear what you're saying, and I respect what you're saying. Self-care doesn't have to be the hour-long bubble bath. I mean, that's wonderful. If you can do that, self-care can be small. It can come in small increments throughout the day. It can be, if you're working a job where you don't get breaks, you can't move away from your station. There are things you can do standing in your station, sitting at your desk, grounding exercises, for example, that you can do that just start to call your energy back to yourself, which is how I think of it, right? When you're working constantly, the energy is going out to your clients, your customers, your boss, your coworkers, whatever it is, it's out, and that's depleting. And what self-care does, if it's a, bubble bath or a spa day or a run or just 60 seconds of putting both feet on the ground and both hands down on your lap or on the table and literally just thinking, I'm bringing my energy back right now. Taking some deep breaths, which is a fantastic hack. If you can do it, we don't always feel connected enough to our bodies to take deep breaths, but you can also rub your ear. There's a way of doing a similar thing in that little space behind your ear. Activates the vagus nerve in your body, which takes you out of fight, flight, or freeze. It's just a hack. Doesn't matter what your brain's thinking. These are things that you can do that are in fact self-care. The noticing, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I'm feeling tired. These are things that you can do in the moment. I want to be clear though, not to say that that's enough.
Right.
I want to be clear to also say that it is not entirely the responsibility of the individual in a situation where a person of color is so overworked, twice the effort for half the salary, double the hours, where they have a community of people or family looking to them for support. The stresses are profound.
Yes.
And those are institutionalized. Those are the results of a biased society. And so I think it's important to say that it's not like, hey, go calm yourself down and keep doing it. We were talking earlier about Audre Lorde's famous phrase or quote rather, that caring for myself is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that itself is an act of political warfare, but it's not enough. And that it is not simply the responsibility of people of color to somehow make it work, make themselves have because the physical toll of holding trauma in the body, of living such multidimensionally stressful lives is real. Creates inflammation in the body. It supports the evolution of disease and it shortens lifespans. And so it can't be the case that it's just, well, and we over here, people like me, all of us in society have to take our part in changing this, right? In creating a huge paradigm shift to where the burden of labor is finally not on the backs of people of color in this country. This problem cannot be solved in the same way that it was created. So whenever and wherever there is an opportunity to establish a boundary, we've been talking about this hypothetical situation of a person at work who's on a double shift and can't leave their space or is working long hours closing a deal. But then there are also situations where maybe it isn't the work obligation, it's the family obligations pulling in multiple ways, or it's community obligations. And there are spaces where it feels hard to say no, but or to do something differently. But where doing so can create a ripple effect where you're giving permission to others to do the same. And that is work that we can choose to do for ourselves. But we have to make those decisions for ourselves as individuals because no one's going to come up to us and say, you seem overworked. I think you should take a few days off. Take them on me. Here's a gift certificate to a spa. Like that really doesn't happen. Right. We have to make those choices for ourselves and understand that doing so profoundly impacts the way that the people who are watching us, kids and younger generations watching us, make choices about how we treat ourselves or learning how to treat themselves.
Yeah, you said a lot there. But one of the things I wanted to double click on was, talking about as we sit into the conversation around people of color and mindfulness, self-care, and how we got here in terms of the additional, as I like to call, cultural taxation, right, that people of color experience in a lot of spaces, but definitely in professional spaces. And so as these people are often forced to perform in certain ways, whether it's for others, there is an expectation often of people that extends beyond self. And even for those who are just passionate about advancing racial equity, as we are, right? How can mindfulness help prepare individuals for doing the type of work that requires a mindful shift and change, and also prepare individuals for leadership? Because I know that the goal of Mindful MBA is all around providing techniques, for individuals who are in active pursuit of their goals. But how does that then empower them to achieve their goals?
Yeah. So a regular mindfulness practice increases and sharpens your ability to regulate your nervous system yourself using the tools that you already have, or you don't have to buy a mindfulness kit online to be able to do the mindfulness thing. It's using awareness, it's using breath, it's using the body, it's using the presence of the space around you. It enables you to regulate your own nervous system so that you're having a different experience in your body is having a different experience in the moment. And then when you begin to express outward in interaction with others, you're coming from a grounded and present place. And people can feel that. They know that, right? When you're in conversation with someone who is fully there in the conversation, who is bringing their whole intellect or creative self into the conversation. And we know that because it's becoming less and less selfish as we become more distractible. We could do a whole conversation on that as well.
Yes.
But I have a slide when I give presentations, often in group settings, that talks about attention, intention, and breath, and how those are the three things I say you need, to do a mindfulness practice. And they're all leadership skills. Being able to pay attention, being present, being strategic. Intention is vision. It's being able to guide people, guide an organization forward. And breath is really just body. It's the physical self. It's stamina. It's the ability to continue doing this over time and to not burn out from doing too much, too fast, too soon. So it enables actual presence in the work for a longer period of time. Mindfulness is work that supports your body but it also literally increases the gray matter in your brain, creates new neural pathways for you, undoes potentially unhealthy patterns in behavior and interaction by just
Question:
bringing awareness to
What
them.
are new neural pathways for?
So neural pathways are, think of it as like a well-trodden path
Okay.
in the mind when you have, been in a situation that required you to behave in certain ways over time. As you continue forward outside of that situation, that's now a pattern. That's like a little, framework in your mind for your mind to work less hard in future situations and say, I know what this is, and I'm going to think this way, think about it this way, and behave in this way in this situation. So it's a well trodden path of like, well, just follow that road because it's here. Instead of, wait a minute, am I actually in the same place I've been in before, or is something different here? The ability to stop and create a new way of thinking, a new way of behaving in a situation, of seeing what's often called in mindfulness beginner's mind, coming into situations and asking with open curiosity, what's actually happening here? It means reserving for just a moment the expectation that you know how this conversation is going to go, and you've been here before, you've met people like this before, you know all about this.
It sounds like almost that it's like continuous improvement for
Yeah.
mind and the thought, right? Like, as opposed to being stuck in this, if X, then Y, but also to really take a moment to think about and be, I say critical for lack of better words, of what this actual experience is. What are the inputs? Who are the individuals? And not assuming, because going back to trauma, we often have trauma responses to certain things versus being able to, like you said, take a second and recognize, is this the same situation in the past? And even if it is, right, do I still want to respond to it?
Exactly. Do I want to continue responding this way, or do I want to try something different? And it's hard to be that person that's doing it differently, especially if you're working with a family or in a workplace or a community of some kind where, like, this is what this means and this is how it's done, how it goes. And being the one that says, is it though? I'm going to try something different. You're going to get called out for it. But, we've quoted Audre Lorde already. I'll quote Jay-Z next, who says, like, people look at you strange saying you changed. Like, you work that hard to stay the same.
Right.
Like,
But they do.
yeah, they're gonna.
We love a good
They're gonna.
Jay-Z.
Yeah. I mean, that's
The great poet that is Sean Connery. But
exactly. Yeah. But that's what it's about. And you just have to be like, yeah, I'm trying something different. It doesn't feel good to me when we do this way all the time. And man, that can be generational work.
I was going to say, what I'm hearing is breaking the
Mhm.
generational cycle of the way that we do things. One, you're going inward. So you're determining, do you want to respond a certain way? Even just physically, it's not even necessarily in verbal response, but then also it can be a tool to break those generational cycles of things and responses and choose a different path forward. I will say, as someone personally, I'm very committed to the idea of personal continuous improvement. And so really being thoughtful about how I want to show up in the world and creating and crafting that. So it sounds like this is a good practice for anyone who wants to be very intentional about how they show up in the world, in the work, which includes in the workplace. Myself as a manager, my goal in my personal development work has been moving from reacting to responding. And so I think that the idea and usefulness of mindfulness is taking that second to be grounded, to be able to respond versus react to whatever, whether it's just life coming at you, it's not necessarily any person, just whatever the circumstance is.
Yes. And what's really liberating about this is that this isn't about becoming some like holier than thou type person. If you can find what Viktor Frankl called the space between stimulus and response, his famous quote is that in that space lies your choice and there's your freedom. You get to choose, how am I going to respond, instead of boom, how do I react? But you can still do whatever. You can still tell somebody off. You can still honk your horn. You're just choosing it. This isn't about, I'm going to become a person who's never angry. I'm going to become a person who's never uncomfortable. Like, you're human. Of course you're going to be. And sometimes that anger might be righteous anger. Like, it might be anger that needs to be deployed to make some change happen. Do it in a way that's going to be productive, right? Because you found that space. to make a decision. Or maybe in that moment, the anger is diffused. But it is really important to know that when you are processing emotion, like we're trying to move it out of the body. Deep breathing helps to move it out of the body, but we're not trying to suck it all in and say,
Right.
okay, this isn't about like, oh, I never feel bothered. I never feel upset. I'm mindful. So I never like, no, 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 no. It's about being like, look at that. I'm so upset. I'm so angry. I'm so disappointed. I'm so bored, whatever. Pulling it out and looking at it and being like, okay, this is what's here. Let me honor that this is my experience. So it's worth paying attention to. I'm worth paying attention to and work through it that way. Because if you think this is about stuffing it all back in and being a person who never feels those things, then you're putting it with your trauma and it's all just going to stew in there together. This is about movement. This is about change. This is about liberation. It's not about containment.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. I really like the idea that it's being intentional. Mindfulness allows you to be intentional in the choice that you make. So you said earlier, it's not about not getting upset or not honking your horn. It's about not being on autopilot, but truly
Yes.
making a concerted effort to do that thing and questioning what is your autopilot. So questioning, why am I conditioned to respond this way? Is it based on prior experiences? Is it based on what I saw growing up? And is that how I want to continue to respond? Or do I want to do something? And maybe it's really like, no, that worked for me. this
Yeah.
energy, this energy works for me. But it's setting a certain intentionality, right? Around
Yeah.
who we are in our day-to-day lives, whether like I
Yeah.
said, whether it's work, whether it's in, familiar relationships, romantic relationships, business partnerships, all of the above. I wanted to ask you, how do you coach your client and your fellows to be able to find rest within the idea of achievement and goal setting? And I say that as I like to call myself a recovering overachiever, and the idea that it's always about what's next, right? What's the next goal? And how can our listeners be thoughtful about finding rest even in the midst of having goals and certain achievements that they want to accomplish?
Yeah. I think it's about recognizing that it's required, that finding time for rest enables you to do better work when the time comes to work. And there's a time for work and there's a time for rest, and putting rest in your schedule the same way you're putting work in your schedule. In fact, I often say to my clients, you need to rest with as much intention as you work. We work so hard and then the rest gets thrown by the wayside whenever we think we can catch it. It is incredibly important because it enables the work. Work without rest becomes less productive, less valuable, less intentional, lower quality. And that's not what you want to put out. That's not honoring yourself. And so you have to put it in the schedule and you have to honor it. And that can be a slow creep past like, okay, my lights out time is whenever. My lights don't come on until whenever. Like a slow start to your day is restful as well as like a slow ramp down into your night. And if you can't do both of those things, pick one. If it's a midday break, whatever it is, if it's a day off every week, like really off, take that and recognizing that sleep is part of rest, but going offline is rest as well. Resting the part of you that works, filling your cup with friends, with humor, with nature. That's rest too.
Yeah.
So it's not always about when I'm sleeping, I'm resting, and when I'm up, I'm going at 110%, and my nervous system is completely shot, and I'm, pouring caffeine down all the time, and I'm just not present. I never sit down, and then I crash, and then I get up and do it again. There needs to be other kinds of rest present as well. One of my favorite yoga teachers has written a book that I think might be great for anyone who's interested in learning more about rest. Her name is Octavia Rahim. And she's written a wonderful book that has some really great snippet takeaways about why rest matters and why it should be, prioritized
Yeah.
as part of the equation. Think of it as much as it's important to sit down and do the brainstorming or do the task. It is important to be offline. And all of that works toward the end result.
Yeah. But, we live in a culture, especially when we think about social media, it's hustle, it's grind culture. I can't necessarily speak of how it compares to non-person of color, but certainly in the back of me, like there's a certain uncomfortability with the idea of rest and the potential association of rest as laziness, right? Like, so
Mhm.
how can we decouple that? How can we understand that when we take those moments of rest, even when our to-do list is still very, very long? How can we have a mindful shift around the way that we see rest and understand that it is being lazy and that it's
Yeah.
something that should be pursued. And also, it's not a luxury, but it's a birth.
Yeah.
And that's hard
Yeah.
for a lot of people of color to feel when life and accomplishments and achievement is particularly hard, given all of the structural and systematic, injustices that continue to persist.
I will say that I don't know if there's an easy answer to that question, but the only way to get permission to rest is to give yourself permission to rest. You have to decide that it's something you need and something you choose to do. And I've had some really interesting conversations lately with people about grind culture. And as we move, through our teen years into our 20s, into our 30s, or in sort of building mode. And I think people are hitting that reflection point younger and younger now. Wait a minute, what am I feeding with this work?
Mhm.
What do I actually want from my life every day? What do I actually need? And that's a luxury to step back and to ask yourself those questions. But any of us can do it. It's just a conversation with yourself. And any limitations that show up of like, well, I could never, I sometimes I say like, well, if you could never, then you won't ever. I don't know if you say so, but we have to start with giving ourselves that permission and also noticing when we are in positions of leadership, be it in a family, a community, a workplace, we can be the people who say, have you rested? Please rest after this to the people that we manage. We can choose to do that. We cannot be responsible for the experiences of others, but we can ask questions that prompt them to consider or reconsider the choices that they're making about their energy and their time and their workload. And just opening the conversation. Some people will say, I can't rest. I'll rest when I'm dead. I can't do it. Okay, that's for you. But I'm presenting something different. Like everybody gets to choose. And what we can't do is expect other people to validate the decisions that we're making for ourselves by making them for themselves.
Say that again.
We cannot expect other people to validate the decisions that we're making for ourselves by making them for themselves.
Mhm.
We cannot expect that. So if I decide, you know what, I'm feeling burned out and I'm not going to work on whatever day of the week anymore, I'm not going to work on the weekends, I'm going to put my phone away at 9 p.m., whatever it is, I'm going to do this because I need this for me. And then you tell your coworkers and they're like, okay, well, we're going to keep working all weekend. You cannot expect them to validate your choice. That's going to feel uncomfortable. If you're pushing against the grain and you're, doing something differently that stands out because you're breaking a pattern and trying to change a culture somewhere, you can't expect other people to say, oh, we love that idea, so we're all going to do it too. And I think societally, that's something that we look for in our communities. We look for validation in decisions. We want people around us to make the same choices so that we feel like, okay, I must be doing this right.
Yeah.
And then somebody spirals off and is like, I'm going to build a way different life. And everyone's like, well, that person is so different. Well, that person, something's wrong with them. And like, I don't know, they seem pretty happy. Maybe there isn't anything wrong with them, right? But if we're really going to make decisions that are right for us individually, that take care of us, whether it's about how we manage our bodies, whether it's about how we manage our careers or our family choices, we cannot expect validation from other people. They're just not going to give it to us.
You are absolutely right about that. And as we, start to wrap up, what do you want people to think most about leadership and positioning when it comes to professional spaces?
Remembering that even though leadership is expressed outwardly, mindful leadership starts by going in, by being willing to explore and work with whatever your inner landscape looks like on a regular basis. Like we are changing all the time. And so we have to keep coming back to these practices so that we do the work with what's going on with us so that when we go to work, we're not having a conversation with someone that isn't actually about them and we're still mad at mom for last night or whatever, because that is not the person that people want to get behind, want to follow, want to know more about where they're going to take us and what is their vision. People want to feel seen and heard and understood to the highest extent possible. And that is when they're like, okay, I'm interested in where you're going.
Yeah.
I think you see me and I think you're invested in me as a person versus me as employee number 1, 2, 3, 4 of this organization. And people can feel that even if you're managing a 50,000 person organization, you can think about your people and make choices for the company with them in mind. That is mindful leadership. Then you've got people doing better work, being innovative, being creative, being productive, but also just living higher quality lives.
Yeah.
And it's first about prioritizing that. So, I don't really love when I see mindfulness being used as a tool for increasing productivity. And without the context of you, it's not about the work. It's about you first and the people you work with and for and the people who work for you. And then what is it that you will choose to do collectively?
Yeah.
And how can that be infused with meaning based on its place in your life as a human first?
Yeah. When we think about leadership and how leaders really do set the tone. And so being mindful and be present will feeling seen and heard and valued in the organization is important. So how can these practices be helpful for them earlier, even maybe mid-career, and may or may not be in traditional leadership roles, but how could they still use this to be able to successfully navigate a career for themselves?
Well, nothing makes me happier than to think about early career folks adopting these practices and making them a habit. I think that one of the most important tools an early career person can learn is the pause. So if we were going to take the word mindfulness out of this, we could replace it with awareness, just coming into a practice of awareness. I see myself here. I see how I'm responding. I see my internal reaction. I respond accordingly. And the pause in which that awareness occurs, just learning how to inhabit that space. I'm not going to put a number of minutes around it, but just a willingness to put the phone down, flip the screen down, and just sit. Just visit with yourself for a few minutes so that your entire life isn't about all those people out there, all that stuff out there, all the things that are happening out there. You recognize that I'm the one in these experiences. The practice of spending time with yourself, the person who knows how to do that and recognize and process what's going on inside is queued up to be an incredible leader when the time comes. It's not about here are 10 tips for having difficult conversations. Like I can produce those for you. ChatGPT can produce those for you. But it's about self-understanding, self-awareness, and intentional action. And person who can do those things in the park on a Saturday afternoon can do them in a boardroom on Monday morning as well.
Yeah. So I think you left the listeners with quite a few things, but what are a couple of small things? Let's say someone who's just getting started thinking about incorporating mindfulness into their day-to-day practice. What are a couple of steps that they can take to get started after listening to this episode?
Well, of course, I have audio recordings on the mindfulmba.com website. You can check out if you want to listen to some guided meditations. I do think guided practices can be really helpful. You can get them on my website. You can get them on a million different apps. I don't get anything from these apps, but go to your app store and there's all the big names that you can download. They're all great, right? It's just about getting into the practice. If you're like, I don't know, that seems like too much for me right now, then I would say look at the daily activities that you're doing anyway and try to do them mindfully. So next time you brush your teeth, actually pay attention to the sound the toothbrush makes, the way your toothpaste tastes, the temperature of the water that you're using. That is like a very dialed in experience in the present moment as to what you're actually experiencing. You can do that when you're walking to the subway or walking to work in your garden or working like anything. Present moment activity that you're doing with your body, pay attention to how it smells, tastes, feels, sounds, like all of those things is a really, really nice entry point into practicing mindfulness and actually living mindfully. Even if you do establish it a practice through an app or on your own, you're going to want to take it into your life anyway. And what a beautiful thing to be able to click into awareness while you're folding laundry.
Yep.
And to really be present there regardless.
One thing you said earlier and just highlighted now that I want to highlight for our listeners as well is that it's practice, which means, just the idea that there isn't a mastering of it. It's something that you do day to day and you get better at it, but it's always a practice, right? Because we're always evolving. And so just setting that the expectation that you arrive at some magical pinnacle of awareness and mindfulness and now you're good to go, but it's really just constantly reiterating on what you know about your day-to-day life, ways, behaviors, etc.
Yeah. Mindfulness practice is not about becoming perfect at practicing mindfulness. It's about living mindfully, living a richer, more present life in every dimension of your existence. It is not about mastering the practice. You will never feel that way. I've been practicing for 20 years, and lately I've been having days where I'm just full of distraction in my practice. And that's just how it is right now. I'm still practicing now, and it won't always be that way. It's about bringing it into your life more than it's ever about being good at it.
I love that. I love that. And then I think you mentioned it already, but want to give the space to note how our listeners can connect with you. So your website, your social, if you have any social media links to share.
Thank you.
In the show notes as well.
Okay, awesome. So mindfulmba.com is the website. I am on some of the socials. I'm on Instagram at the Mindful MBA. I'm also on LinkedIn. I'm also on Facebook. There's a way you can reach out to me through the website as well if you want to contact me directly about working together in any capacity or you're just curious what I'm doing. But I would love to connect with anybody out there. I also offer 2 free live online mindfulness sessions every month on the first and third Wednesday of every month at 12:30 p.m. Eastern time. 30 minutes, super casual, log in through Zoom, and you can sign up for that on my website. You'll get the link via email, and then you'll just have it on your calendar or whenever you're free to join. It's a really nice community when we all meet up together on those Wednesdays. So everyone's invited. $0
it's awesome.
to participate.
I have attended those sessions and I thoroughly enjoy it. And it's really nice to do it in the middle of the week, in the middle of the day, to just take a second to be still and reflect and do the breath work. So I would highly, highly recommend participating in those if you can join, especially because they're free. But thank you so much, Shannon, for joining me today for this just insightful conversation around mindfulness, aka awareness, and just how our listeners can be more intentional in the way that they move forward in their day-to-day lives. So we appreciate you and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joycelyn. It's been an absolute pleasure. This is wonderful.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for today, folks. Enjoyed the show? Be sure to like and rate the podcast. You can find the Race, Wealth, and Health podcast on multiple platforms, including Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you never miss an episode. I also want to hear from you, so don't forget to connect with me on social media. You can follow the podcast on Instagram and Facebook at Race, Wealth, Health. By joining the online community, you'll stay updated on the latest episodes, behind-the-scenes insights, and engaging discussions. Share your thoughts, comments, and questions there. I appreciate your support in sharing the podcast with your friends, family, and colleagues who may also find value in these conversations. Thank you again for joining me on this journey. Until next time, take care, stay informed, and keep up the good fight for equality.